Hello and welcome to our bite-sized webinar on the post-Brexit immigration regime, which is part of our Employment 2021 in the Pipeline series. I'm Alex Fisher, one of the partners in our Employment and Business Immigration team, and I'm joined by Moji Ayederan, one of our senior associates and a business immigration specialist. Today, we're going to look at what the UK immigration system looks like for EU nationals now that the Brexit transition period has ended. Starting with the first slide here then, we'll come on to look at the key details in a moment, but by way of summary, the regime has different implications for EU nationals depending upon when they arrived in the UK. So looking at it through the lens of the employer, for EU nationals, the business already employed as at 31st of December 2020, who we've termed here existing EU employees, they continue to have the right to live and work here. They don't need a visa, but they will need to apply for settled status, and they need to do that by the end of June this year. For new employees coming from the EU after 1st of January this year, so those coming to the UK on or after that date, the business now has to obtain a visa for them to allow them to work in the UK. And finally, the third category, which is a new hire for the employer, but an EU national who was already in the UK as at 31st of December last year. Like the first category I mentioned, there is no need to obtain a visa, as these individuals can continue to live and work here, but they will need to apply for settled status. So this next slide focuses on the arrangements where a visa is needed. This is applicable for EU nationals and nationals from other jurisdictions from outside of the UK. The first point is that employers wishing to employ these individuals will need a sponsor license. And on top of that, the individual will need to meet a minimum point score threshold. There are two routes here. The skilled worker route, which is a medium skill level threshold, a minimum salary and an English language requirement, and the intra-company transfer route, so bringing an employee within the business but in another jurisdiction across to the UK. Here there is a requirement to have previous experience with the business, a high skill level, and a salary level threshold. There is a two-stage application process to obtain the certificate of sponsorship and then the required visa. So it's important to factor in sufficient time for this administration. Moji is now going to go through these routes in more detail.
Thanks, Alex. Now we'll take a look at the skilled worker route first. As Alex has mentioned, newly arriving EU nationals are now covered under this route in the same way as non-EU nationals. Now, this is a points-based route, so individuals need to score 70 points to qualify. Now, you need a job offer from a licensed sponsor, so that means that the employer needs a sponsor license. Now, if you're an employer who doesn't yet have a license, applications can take around 8 weeks. So, and that's the process unless you pay a priority fee. So it's well worth thinking now about whether you might need a license and then applying early. The next thing to think about is that the role needs to meet the minimum skill level. So that's broadly A-level standard. Now this is lower than the previous tier 2 route. So that means there's a wider pool of jobs that can potentially be sponsored. The individual will then need to also demonstrate that they meet that their English language skills meets the relevant level. So certain nationalities can meet this requirement automatically. So for example, a US national would. But remember, if you're sponsoring an EU national, they'd have to have studied a degree taught in English, or they'd need to have an English test that meets the requirements. Now, the good thing under the new rules is that the resident labour market test is now gone, and the annual cap on numbers is also gone. However, there's still a salary threshold to meet, and this will very much depend on the job type that you're looking at and whether the role is a shortage role, and also whether the candidate holds a relevant PhD. And if you've got somebody who's a recent graduate, the salary threshold, it can be adjusted in line with that. Now, it's worth remembering that the existing Tier 2 general visas are still valid under the old regime. But if an individual needs to extend or if they move jobs, then that new application will come under the new skilled worker route. So what about the intra-company transfer or ICT route? Now, this route is also points-based and requires 70 points. You need an employer with a license, which importantly must cover the ICT route. Now, this route is for multinational companies with offices or group entities based abroad. And if you already hold a license, you should check that it is set up to cover ICTs, and also that any relevant linked entities you have outside the UK are included. Now, with the ICT route, there's a much higher skill level to look at, higher than the skilled worker route. So you'd need to be transferring somebody to come to the UK to work on a graduate level role. So there will be jobs that will qualify under the skilled worker route that will actually be too junior for an ICT visa. However, with this ICT route, there's no English language requirement to worry about, so that may well be a deciding factor. The thing to remember with this route is that the individual needs to already have worked for a linked entity outside the UK for at least 12 months. Otherwise, they'd need to be paid a salary that is at or above 73,900. Now, the minimum salary that you need to be paying for an ICT is actually higher than the skilled worker route. So again, that's another difference. And you need to be paying at least 41,500 or whatever the minimum for that particular job type is. In some cases, it may well be higher. Now, it's worth remembering that the ICT route is temporary. So there is effectively a cap in terms of the time an individual can stay in the UK on this visa, and it can be up to 5 years in any 6-year period, unless the person is a high earner. So if you're looking at a permanent move to the UK, you really need to be looking at the skilled worker route rather than the ICT route. The key change with the new regime is that existing ICT visa holders can now apply to move into the skilled worker route. So we've seen a number of clients actually looking at moving people who have been here for a few years already with an ICT visa, where it now looks like they will be required in the UK on a longer term basis.
Thanks, Moji. So on to fees then. The requirement to have a sponsor license and costs associated with the visas means that it's definitely more expensive to hire EU workers under this regime than it was prior to Brexit. Working it through on the basis of a 5-year visa for a medium or large business, there is the application fee of £1,220, the certificate of sponsorship fee and immigration skills charge at £5,199, and the immigration health surcharge of £2,120, which totals over £9,500 of additional cost. The costs are lower for small employers and charities, but they are still significant.
So looking at the another one of the sort of the key changes to be aware of under the post-Brexit regime is right to work. The position for existing EU employees, so those you already have here working for you before the 31st of December 2020 date, is that right to work checks you've already done will continue to be valid, but do remind them that they will need to apply for EU settlement scheme status during the current grace period between now and the 30th of June 2021. So what about your new hires then? Well, if they've been here before the 31st of December 2020, you can accept their EU ID cards and passports, and they don't need to show you their EU settlement scheme status at the hiring stage. But note though that if they are just moving to the UK, so they weren't here before the end of the transition period, you will need to look into whether they actually need a work visa, as they won't be covered by the EU settlement scheme. Now, it's worth mentioning, whilst we're all working from home at the moment, that you can do checks remotely, and in some cases, they can be done online. So individuals with biometric residence permits, you'll be able to check their right to work online. Also, an EU national who's been granted EU settlement scheme status or has a skilled worker visa or an ICT visa, they'll receive their status electronically. So again, you'll be able to verify their status online. So moving on to look at compliance then. Now, compliance is a really key piece of the puzzle for employers, both in terms of right to work as well as sponsorship compliance. With the changes to the sponsorship regime that we've just been going through, and also the upcoming changes to right to work rules once the grace period ends, it will be really important that you get your house in order as an employer to avoid issues further down the line. So we've been helping clients with undertaking audits and supporting reviews on that front, just to get them prepared. The other piece is obviously in terms of training and reviewing your policies and processes, and really thinking about who needs to know about the changes, and also ensuring that they actually understand the practical implications and what it means for them day to day.
Finally then, onto the impact on business travel. So UK nationals no longer have freedom of movement or the right to work in the EU. There are passport and border requirements now, meaning that passports have to have a minimum of 6 months left before expiry for someone to be able to travel on it. It is possible for UK nationals to travel to the EU as a business visitor, but activities that can be done under those headings are limited, so will need to be checked. And because there is no uniform rules, the UK and each of the EU member states have their own business visitor rules. So it's important that the rules are checked on a country by country basis. We can, of course, support with advice on the different requirements. Okay, so that's all we were going to cover today. If you do have any questions on the new regime and its application to the circumstances of your business, do please reach out to Moji or me, and our contact details are there on that slide. Thanks all.